by way of introduction, my name's David Wells, and one of the founders of Purposefully Human. And I think, like everyone, just share a great interest in and belief in that we could be more human and humane in the way that we do the work that we're doing. And really, Purposefully Human was set up just to be a meeting place where like-minded people could gather, share tips, and see how we can bring about some change. And I'd like to introduce my co-host, Katy. I'll let you introduce yourself, Katy.
Hello. So I recently graduated from university doing a marketing and management degree, and I formed a particular interest in purpose-led and sustainable businesses. And I met David through a student consultancy program and then went on to do some more work for his business, Shared Aim. And kind of through the work I did with him, I definitely picked up on the need for more human practices, and it kind of really opened my eyes to it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to speaking to Neal about his book today and exploring that topic.
Thank you, Katy. And Arsha, Michelle, and Ross, you're very welcome. I'm so pleased that you're joining us today. And of course, and Jerry, who is also a co-founder and member of the leadership team of Purposefully Human. And last but very not least, Neal Woodson. We're delighted you're joining us today, Neal. And at this stage, I know we would normally read out the bio in full, but I've just picked up on a point because at the weekend I had cause to think of this, and it's almost like the universe is working for me. I walked into an independent coffee shop that we've been meaning to try for some time, and as we walked down, two people behind the counter, one engaged in writing, one mending a piece of equipment. The coffee shop was only half full, not busy by any means. We walked from the front all the way down, no eye contact, no recognition. We stood for a few seconds looking at the food, still no eye contact, no recognition. Then we looked at each other, turned tail and walked out. And I thought, it just made me think of that. You couldn't ask for less effort of just acknowledging we were there and saying, we'll be with you. And in the course of about a minute, that didn't happen. And it just really brought me back to the willingness to be inconvenienced, which I know we'll touch on during that. And so I think I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself, but the bit I just looking through your bio that struck me, the informality of it, that you talk about your mission rather than your achievements and exactly what you've done. And I love that tone, but also that intersection of leadership and inspiring service. And I think it really plays to what we think about in Purposefully Human, which is it's not an either or. We have to recognize everyone has a legitimate interest and need. The skill is in how do we bring those together. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation with you today. So thank you so much for joining us, Neal. And I'm going to hand over to you just to do a brief introduction, and then Katy will pick up some questions for you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon in your case. And thank you for inviting me. And thank you for putting it together in this interesting format. It's going to be fun, just having a fireside chat with friends. And I'm very fortunate to have some friends who I've had for years and some new friends. But a little bit about me. The majority of my life has been spent teaching and coaching people on how service can improve their lives and their careers and their organizations. And my past includes working in retail and restaurants and business and schools. I was briefly a orchestra director in a high school, and I worked teaching at the college level as well. My background is from music. How I got into the business world, don't ask, it's a long story. But I've been in student-facing roles, obviously, but in customer-facing roles and management roles and administrative roles. But the thing I like to do the best, the most fun I've ever had in my life, is to lead workshops and to work with people in classes where you can just see light bulbs go off in people's heads and see that you've made a difference and feel like, wow, this person's going to walk away and be able to do something different in their life. So I've also written, and I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of posting on my blog at nealwoodson.net and on Instagram and Twitter, even though Twitter's turned into kind of a dumpster fire, but it's I still post there. I've written 2 books. One's called The Uncomplicated Coach, and yes, shameless self-promotion. They're both behind me. One is called The Uncomplicated Coach, and it's kind of a how-to guide for becoming a better manager by learning how to lead with a coaching approach. And then I've also written, and again, shameless self-promotion, a book that I put out and we're probably going to talk about today called Giving a Shit. And it's basically about how to focus on service and how it can transform your workplace and your life. So, but most of the time, I spend my time now coaching and mentoring people and people in organizations, doing a little bit of consulting and writing. And I'm just trying to further a cause I think we all believe in, and that it's just making things more purposefully human, particularly in our business world. But I think, in the world in general, we need to make it more purposefully human. So I'm really focused on that mission. Like you said, that's what I want to do. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Neal. It's really interesting to hear how many different areas you've explored as well. I'm sure that's helped a lot with writing the book. In terms of just to start out, I wanted to ask what inspired you to write your book?
It was Jerry. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, some conversation I had with Jerry had something to do with some of it, but it really started, we'll go back to 2019. My wife and I had planned a trip to go to Spain in 2020. And we were going to go to Madrid and Malaga and then go to Barcelona. And my wife is the consummate planner in our family. And she had planes, trains, automobiles, hotels, all of that stuff. And then COVID came and ended it all. And so then my wife had to work in reverse and cancel planes, trains, automobiles and try to get our money back. And in that process, she was constantly met with resistance. It was just this constant kind of battle to get the money back. And there were policies and the need for this and that and the other thing and receipts and all these different things. It was just a nightmare. And so one day, in just exasperation, she says, why is nothing ever easy? Why don't companies care about their customers? I mean, we pay their bills, for God's sakes. She was really upset. And so I walk in and Mr. Cynical, and I said, well, what did you expect? I mean, companies are self-interested. It's all about them. That your money is what matters, not them or not you, Obviously very cynical. And we both had a little chuckle about it. But the more I thought about it, the more riled up I got. Because here we are in a global pandemic and people are suffering. And all they can think about is their money and their money and their money. And the more I thought about it, I was like, it shouldn't be this way. It just should not be like this. And of course, I talked with other friends about this issue, and all of them said the same thing. Well, it's just human nature. It's just, we're all self-interested. We're all just selfish. And so that really got me thinking, are we just selfish bullies in this kind of zero-sum game? Is that what everything is all about? And so I really wanted to come to terms with that. And, that was really what drove it from the get-go. So.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the struggle of having to speak to people in service sometimes and just not having your issue resolved quickly. Like, I definitely relate to that. Even just recently, I can think of so many instances that it's happened. So yeah, I can completely see how that would inspire you. When you were actually writing the book, was there anything you learned that was kind of unexpected, new, or challenging your own views about people and what it actually meant to be human?
This is going to sound a little silly, but how complicated it is. It's really complicated. But it's also simple in some ways. And one of the things that I found was we have this real kind of rugged, tough human complex. We are obsessed with this idea that it's a dog-eat-dog world and you got to kill or be killed to survive. We throw around terms like survival of the fittest, nice guys finish last, winning is everything. And we believe the biggest and the strongest that's the only way we can succeed. And so survival of the fittest has become kind of this crutch to justify dog eat dog. And the more I researched, one of the things that I found was that survival of the fittest is not Darwinian. Darwin never said that. In fact, a lot of the stuff that I read said that if he had coined a phrase, it would have been survival of the most cooperative or survival of the most helpful. Because what he observed was that the groups that worked together and helped each other, those are the ones that thrive. So for him, Natural selection was more about kind of practical survival, not victory, or not this zero sum, somebody's got to win game. Survival of the fittest was actually coined by a guy named Herbert Spencer. And he was a contemporary of Darwin who kind of manipulated or warped Darwin's ideas to justify his own kind of point of view. And that was that some people deserve to be on top and other people don't. And for him, those people were wealthy, white, educated Christian men. And of course he was one of those. So, but he wanted to keep the power structure the same. And unfortunately, that turned into something called social Darwinism, and it spawned a lot of terrible things like Nazism and eugenics and apartheid, just to name a few. But regardless of that, survival of the fittest has come down to be pretty common. I mean, when we all of us probably in school, when we learned about evolution, survival of the fittest was equated with Darwinian evolution theory, right? And it's just become so common. And it's also been there have been things like it throughout history. I mean, if you go back to the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve ate the apple and it's downhill from there. We're just depraved humans from there. Thomas Hobbes in the 17th century talks about man being nothing more than man against man. We're always going to fight each other. In the 1960s, Ayn Rand she wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, where she literally praises and celebrates selfishness. And I think it was in the 80s or the 90s, Richard Dawkins wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, where he talked about, our genes are selfish. And while all that's hit us like a sledgehammer, one thing kept bothering me. If that's true, what about firefighters who run into burning buildings to save people they don't even know? What about people who come out during disasters to help others? And they're not getting anything in return. They're doing it just to do it. It really strikes me we've got this kind of battle, this internal struggle going on between selfish competition and helpful cooperativeness. Yeah. And so what I concluded through the whole thing is that we are both, that we have both in us, because science does not define one or the other. It doesn't say we're fundamentally either way. But what I did find was that it's situational, that being competitive and selfish is really for when our survival is threatened, and being cooperative and helpful is the way we should be the rest of the time. History has shown we've been most successful being cooperative and helpful to each other. We've built great cities, we've gone to the moon, we've conquered disease, we've done all these things. Why? Because we help each other. And in fact, if you look at our history, at our ancient history and prehistory, none of us would be here if we didn't help each other. I mean, the only way we survived as cave people was to go together to kill the saber-toothed tiger. If we'd gone out by ourselves, none of us would be here. So I found that really exciting to find that out. And we can change the narrative. That to me was maybe the most exciting thing, that we can change that narrative, and we need to. We'll be healthier, we'll be happier. We need to put humans back into the system. We need to put humans back into business. And by that, what I mean is we need to put care and concern and all those things that only humans can really do. We need to put them back into it, and we can. That's, to me, that's really exciting.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And one of the points I really liked that you made was how when we help one another, or when someone helps us, that oxytocin's released. So it's actually something that benefits both people. You get that nice feeling, and it's just like, it is in our DNA sort of to help one another.
Well, there's two big benefits. One is not only does it benefits the doer, the giver, if you will. They get this nice happy feeling from oxytocin, but it benefits the receiver as well. They get a hit, and people who see it get a hit. So it's almost like it culturally kind of expands, right? The other benefit is that oxytocin actually blocks cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And what they found is that people who are compassionate and helpful actually have health benefits. They have lower blood pressure, lower rates of heart disease, they heal faster, they have longer lifespans, they have less depression. So there are all these benefits that come from it, you know. Um, and I found that exciting as well. If you're interested in that, there's a great book called Compassionomics that talks all about it. And it's by these two doctors who are just serious data freaks who go like to the ends of the earth to find like all this data to prove the point. It's really fascinating.
That does sound really interesting. I'm gonna try and give that one a read. And yeah, just as like what you were saying on actually changing the narrative and trying to encourage businesses to be more human and provide service to one another, it kind of reminded me of one of the points that you made was how in like business schools and corporate training, the subjective skills are often very overlooked. We're never really necessarily taught them or taught to apply them. And as someone who's recently graduated from business school, I can definitely relate to that. You know, it's a lot of just exams and you're proving that you know things, but don't necessarily show it. So, you know, as with like your information and what you've written about, is there any way that you suggest these skills could be taught either like within business schools or corporate environments, just to kind of start changing that narrative and teaching people early on?
Yeah, so let's take a step back and talk about there's two kinds of skills, right? I read a book, I think it was back in 2017 or 2018, a book called The Human Brand. And it's by a guy named Chris Malone and Susan Fisk. Jerry, you might know Chris Malone. Chris Malone is a brand consultant who lives in Philadelphia, and Susan Fisk teaches psychology at Princeton. In the book, they talk about these two dimensions of human experience, one being competence and one being warmth. Competence being objective and very measurable, being, you know, skills and knowledge, things like that. Warmth being subjective, being hard to measure. It's things like teamwork and collaboration, listening skills, communication skills, things like that. The stuff we used to call soft skills. And I believe that they're overlooked for a couple of reasons. One, they're hard to measure. And we love measurement. We just love to measure things. If we can measure things, we get all giddy and excited. But the things that are hard to measure, sometimes we just dismiss them on the whole. And second, in the business world, I think business people think that it's not their responsibility to teach it. It's not their responsibility to train it. That should be taught at home or it should be taught in church, but it's not, that's not for business. But what's ironic is there are some serious studies about the fact that those soft skills matter tremendously. A 1918 study by Harvard and Stanford showed that 85% of workplace success comes from soft skills or those human skills. A study by Google in 2008 about what makes great leaders or great managers, 7 out of the top 10 attributes are human skills. In a 2012 study they did about teamwork, what makes great teams, 4 out of the 5 key attributes are human skills. But yet in our training, and I did a kind of a survey of curriculum of business schools, and I also did looking at corporate training, about 80% of what gets trained is technical, and only about 20% is human. We've got it backwards in what we train versus what we experience. So to your point, how do we train it? Well, I think it's got to go all the way back to the high school. You got to go back to high school. And I think the way we teach, and I've thought this since I was a teacher in a school, we largely teach people, give them a lecture, give them a test, learn the dates, put the date down on a piece of paper, which is only rudimentarily useful. I think the way we need to teach kids is project-oriented work where they do problem solving. And when they do that, they will learn those skills because they'll be forced to. You put kids in a room and say, we got a big problem, use what you know, we got to figure it out. And they learn to work together. They learn to talk to each other. They learn to listen. And sometimes they learn to fight. And hopefully they learn to fight constructively. Yeah. And in the workplace, I think we carry that over into the culture. We have to change the messaging from being all about profit to being all about people. And that needs to be messaged constantly. We need to have leaders that model it and model what it is to be human. We need to make it part of the thinking of the workforce. We need to encourage serving each other. We need to put people in situations where cross-functional meetings and put them into cross-functional projects where they have to work together. And then we need to make it part of all of our delivery systems. I mean, we typically, we have people, we have products, we have processes, and we have places where we interact. And all of them are vehicles for delivering value. And all of those need to be as much human as they are practical and functional. Yeah. And I think they can be. I mean, you can make a product that does what it's supposed to do, but it can also be really easy to learn how to use. It can also be very intuitive. Instead of being, this product's great, but man, I had to read 50 pages of a guide to figure out how to use it. That's not friendly. And I think we need to make all of those things as human as they are functional. So I know that's a long answer to a short question, but.
No, yeah, I think everything you said, completely agree with, of course. And I think what you said, even just about project work at school, is a really good point, because I found the way that I would learn the best is through working with other people, because when you are able to bounce ideas off each other and just get a second opinion on things, it makes such a difference. And that is one thing that my university was quite good for, is we had quite a lot of group projects that would teach you those subjective skills. So I think a lot more of that is definitely needed, even just early on, like you said, in high school. So yeah, just before we open up the conversation to everyone, I had one final question for you, which is a question that the Purposefully Human community tends to ask through a lot of activities, and that is, what does being purposefully human look and feel like? So through this question, it'd be just interesting to hear about an organization that made you feel genuinely human, and how did they achieve that?
Well, I've got several stories in the book, which you can read. You get the book, you can read those. But one story that's not in the book, and this was about a company I worked for years ago. If everybody remembers, back in 2008, when we went through a big financial downturn, when everybody was saying this was the second depression and all that stuff, when banks were going belly up and businesses were going out of business and people were losing their homes, and it was just pandemonium. And obviously, in the company that I worked for, everybody was worried about their job. They were worried about the company going bankrupt. And I'll never forget, an email went out and the CEO said, we're going to have a town hall meeting and we're going to talk about what we're going to do. And of course, everybody thought, I wonder how many people are going to lose their jobs. Well, the call came and we're all sitting in the office, and I had my whole team was around me, and we're all huddled around this TV, this monitor. And the CEO said, we've come up with a plan. And literally, we were all biting our nails thinking, who's going to lose your job? Our plan is that if everybody in this company takes a 7% pay cut and the leadership team takes a 14% pay cut, we will weather the storm. Better that all of us suffer a little than a few of us suffer a lot. And that became a rally cry. That became something that pulled the company together in a whole new way. It was like we all became brothers and sisters. There were some people that were literally crying because there were some worried people, some people saying, I don't know how I'm going to make it on that. But everybody was happy, but they were also proud. They were proud to work for a place that cared about people like that. And it was amazing. The next couple of years were phenomenal, and it continued to be a great place to be because of that. So if ultimately, somebody says, what is purposefully human? I'm going to say it, and people are going to think it's cliche and they're going to roll their eyes, and I'll say it's love. That's it. We don't like to talk about it at work, but it's love. And it's not about romance, and it's not about feelings. It's about action. Because I believe love is a verb. Love is looking out for each other. Love's taking care of each other. It's affirming people's value. It's giving up you for a bit to give of you to somebody else, And I'll tell one last little story. There's a story in the book about a TED talk given by Daniel Goleman. If you know who Daniel Goleman, and he's arguably the father of emotional intelligence. And he tells this story in his TED talk about walking down the stairs to a subway platform in New York. And at the bottom of the steps, he sees this heap of what he thinks is like laundry. Somebody dropped their laundry or something at the bottom of the stairs. And people are stepping over it and walking around it, like it's trash. But as he approaches, he sees that it's a person. And he goes over and he wants to make sure he's alive. And then he's alive, and he moves them off to a safe space. And he begins to talk to the guy, and he gets him something to eat. He brings them a blanket. He truly just helps this person. And as he's getting ready to leave, the guy looks up and he says, thank you for noticing. And Goleman ends the talk with this, and these aren't the words, but it's something to this effect. Maybe the key to being a good human is simply noticing. Maybe that's the first step, And so if you ask me, what does being purposefully human look like? It's not stepping over people. It's taking the time to notice them. And like I say in my book, it's being willing to be inconvenienced to do that. That to me is what being purposefully human is all about. And that's ultimately just love. Yeah. So hopefully that answers the question.
Definitely does. I really love that point. And those two stories are so lovely. Yeah, really enjoyed those. Now I'd like to just open up the conversation to everyone. So feel free to ask Neal any questions that you might have. If you just want to unmute yourself and ask away.
Well, I've got one for Neal.
Oh, good.
No. You're probably one of the best people I know that can shed some light on this, because if you talk about the workplace versus the rest of our lives, we use different vocabulary. In the workplace, we talk about service.
Mm-hmm.
In some places that's actually become a bad word, because it's like, okay, here comes the next program that's going to make my life miserable. In the rest of our lives, we talk about care. And if you're a fairly well-regulated adult, you do a lot of caring. You care for your significant other, your sick child,
mm-hmm.
your parents if they need help, your pets. You do little things out in public that take care of other people. If somebody drops something, you pick it up. But that language doesn't infiltrate the workplace. We don't talk about in the workplace, well, we're going to take care of this customer. We talk about we're going to serve this customer.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were speaking, great book, by the way, Neal. Congratulations on such a clear statement and vision. But I wonder, do you have any insights on how that came to be and how we can change it? Because I'm thinking back on my workplace career, and I have exposure to many people in the workplace through the work I do. And, it's just interesting to me in the workplace, like I said, we talk about service. And, did you get great service? You don't see surveys that say, do you feel like you were taken care of?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the word care is the standard of exchange everywhere else. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because it just seems like we can activate people by talking about caring for others, but I think people are over worrying about providing better service because they've gotten so beaten up over the years.
Jerry, there's a ton to unpack in all that, and I won't unpack it all, but I'll unpack a little bit of it. First off, I think we need to change how we think of what service is. in all realms, because to me, service is our human superpower. Um, Again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. We've done great things, but only because we have worked together and helped each other. And so for me, the definition of service isn't some big, long, multi-syllabic word thing. It's very simple. It's just helping people. That's all it is. And the thing about service is, yes, it involves care. It involves a lot of things. It involves skill and care and knowledge and heart and love and tons of stuff. But service is so much bigger than customer service. When we think about it in business, it's almost always relegated and compartmentalized into customer service. But we serve everywhere all the time. If you get up in the morning and you help your kids get ready for school, guess what? Service. If you let somebody in on the highway, service. If you get milk on the way home, service. If you help with dinner, service. If you put away the dishes, service. We do it constantly. We just don't think about it that way. But it's literally our human superpower. It is something that we do that sets us apart. We're one of the only animals in the animal kingdom that will not only help our own species, will help others to be successful. The other thing is, and you pointed this out really well, is the way we use language. Often we talk about being in service of others. And what that sets up is a hierarchy. And you have a person who, I'm in service of you, so I'm beneath you. I'm your servant. I'm going to go out and serve you. Nobody wants to be that, by the way. There's not a soul that wants to be that person beneath somebody else. So I propose we change the language to, no, we're all of service to each other. Because being of service to each other is, I'm bringing you value. I'm bringing you value that changes the game. I'm not doing something just because you asked me to do it. No, I've got something you need and I'm bringing you value. And we become more on an even footing that way, to do it that way. So I think those are two ways of changing the dynamic overall, is that we begin to think of service as something that we do all the time, everywhere. And second, that we change that language. I'm not in service of you, I'm of service to you. And I think that can change a lot right there. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but close.
I was going to say,
very insightful. Thank you, Neal.
could I add to that? Because I'm going to use a quote from your book that I kind of took some notes that I really loved. Where you said, is a little bit long, but I think it's very valuable. There's kind of there's a mentality that pervades the work arena that doesn't necessarily pervade our personal lives, that makes, I think, that sort of behavior acceptable. And when I say that sort of behavior, that kind of not thinking about the other person. And in Neal's book, he says, with the regular messaging of money, 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 bottom line this and bottom line that, coupled to leadership that prioritizes productivity for profit, cutting costs no matter the impact, laying off people to make the balance sheet look better, and treating people uncivilly in order to maintain authority, a way of thinking gets created that equates success to money, getting promotions, staying ahead of coworkers. And that thinking inspires behaviors ranging from doing good enough work and cutting corners to lying and cheating. So like, we've created this culture in the workplace that's just made that sort of callous behavior more acceptable. I feel like, that whole idea of like, leave yourself, leave that at home. Don't bring that into the workplace. We're here to do work. And really, we can't separate the two. And I just thought that kind of like lays it out very clearly. So it makes sense to me why we have different language, right, between the two arenas, simply because we've kind of created this idea of a separate culture in the workplace that is supposed to be dog eat dog. And then once you get out, you can be a human, you can be kind, and you can be sweet, but you don't have to do it at work because it's different. And that separation is getting blurred every day, I think, a lot because of COVID. People are living and working through their homes. So there's this weird juxtaposition of oh, my child is in the next room and I'm being, I need to be aware and and take care of my child. And so you're showing that care and feeling. And then you come back in your Zoom call and you got to be all serious and, straight faced and no, I don't care. And we're just getting to business. And that's getting blurred. And people are starting to ask why? Why is there that difference? So
Well, and to add to that, Neil was talking about love. We were having this conversation the other day. At work, we've over-indexed on accountability, right? In personal relationships, there's love and accountability, right? But at work, all we talk about is accountability. So accountability without love is not a human relationship. You can't just have one and not the other. So to me, bringing that word to work, bringing love to work, right? Because where does service come from? Comes from empathy. Where does empathy come from? Caring about another human, being willing to put someone before yourself. Yeah, not much of a question, but I just
oh my gosh, I got to write that down.
We've over-indexed on accountability.
What did you say? Love without accountability is not a human relationship. What was that? That was
it's recorded. I don't listen.
I was going to say that's got to be on a bumper sticker on a T-shirt.
But it's inspired by you, Neal. It's inspired by you, no doubt.
But
I met Neal when he was on stage at a conference. We worked at the same organization for a while, and it was an ugly time. It was an ugly merger, and everyone was trying to smile. We had the CEO of one company come up on stage, the president of the other company. Everyone was going to be kumbaya. Neal came up and talked about service, and I said, that's the guy I want to get to know. So he gave the best talk that day, no doubt.
Could I come in with a different perspective? I completely 100% agree with everything that you're saying, Neal, that you've added, Asha, and you too, Ross. And I do wonder if there's a cultural thing between the UK and America here, because I've worked in companies who have really gone full out to improve the human side of what they do, particularly internally. But it always fails. And it fails partially because it's met with cynicism, and it fails partially because it's quite superficial. And I think for me, it's not about the desire to act more human. It's about the practicalities of acting more human. And I'm trying not to name a company right now. And the idea that I'll give you an example, which is just it's not actually relevant to this, but I think it's indicative. And it comes back to what you were saying earlier, Neal, as well, about being taught the practical versus the love. But when I worked at a company, we all did an employee engagement survey. It came out poor. The biggest thing was lack of communication. So our illustrious colleagues in HR created a newsletter. Mm-hmm. And there was no attempt to change the culture. There was no what do
that
people
didn't
mean
fix
by
everything.
Communication. It was just, we'll put out a newsletter. It stopped after a couple of months. Another 10 months later, another survey goes out, and HR like, well, we tried. And I think
well.
And I think we're lucky because we have legal structures in the UK that prevent the worst of the dog eat dog that you guys get in America. But I think we still also struggle with, and you said this earlier, Neal, and I really liked it. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, actually, is when we create a standard of behaviour that's designed to maintain the status quo. And bizarrely, I was watching a crime TV program, and somebody went, "I'm not a grass," and I thought, there's a culture there of telling people grassing is bad in order to protect the real bad guys. And it protects the status quo, but it's not a healthy behaviour in any circumstance. And I think we see that in business too. So sorry, again, not really a question, but there's just so many things resonating. I needed to blurt it all out.
No, and I think we're talking about degrees here. It may be a bit harsher in the United States, but it's all around us. Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about, this cynicism. And by the way, that HR person did was just a Band-Aid over a cancer. Yeah. And that's what happens over and over. That's one of my biggest problems with, and Jerry's heard me say it many times, my biggest problems with the customer experience world is they're doing a lot of stuff that are putting great band-aids over a cancer. And the cancer is they're not changing the thinking. They're not changing the way people, hearts and minds. It's just, let's do a journey map and let's fix all these little touch points. That's great. But until you get people to actually start thinking about what they're doing and get them to start doing things differently with each other, you're not going to change anything. It's just going to be like your newsletter that went out. We've got a long, long history of dehumanizing work. I mean, the whole industrial era, the whole industrial age was really just an effort to dehumanize things. Hey, now we've got machines. They can do the work and they can do it 24/7 and they don't complain and they don't get injured and they don't get sick. They don't go out on strike. And if we can get these machines to do more and more and more, we don't have these pesky humans to do stuff. And now we're seeing industrial age 2.0. We've got AI and it can do everything. It can do everything under the sun. And people are trying to find out, how can it do all these different things? And they're absolutely right, because AI can outthink us. But there's one thing it can't do. It can never outfeel us, and it can never outcreate us. And people ask me, well, what can I do to save my job from AI? I'm like, well, nothing will ensure it. But the best thing you can do is work on being a better human, because that's what you've got in droves.
Mhm.
That's what you've got.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I completely agree on the outcreate, but certainly the NHS has done quite a lot of studies on doctors delivering bad news, and they find that over and over and over again, AI prompts and scripts improve doctors' abilities to deliver bad news. And it's been going on way longer than ChatGTP. I mean, this isn't a new thing, but there is do you have to be empathetic or do you have to seem empathetic? And I think, because people always say to me, oh, a chat can't be as empathetic as a call center person. I've said this to David before, and I'm like, yeah, but the average call center person, unfortunately, is quite low on the empathy scale. So yes, it can. But I think that there is a sense of, and humans are very good at this, seeing faces on pieces of bread, assigning anthropological behaviors and motivations to dogs. I think we are good at spotting when something is nice, and sometimes even creating something that's nice that doesn't exist. Again, I don't know where that takes us. I just think, to be honest with you, I think AI can seem as empathetic, and if it identifies a customer's need and meets it, it may not be empathetic, but it's met that customer's need, and that for me is the key thing.
Well, I'll give you a recent example. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No,
I'll give you a recent example. And Jerry, your response back to me was very, very kind on LinkedIn. But recently I had a death in the family, in my family. And I wanted to let some clients know what had happened. So I sent an email to them saying, I might be distracted for a couple of weeks, just, dealing with this. And most of them all wrote back and with the normal condolences, sympathies, all that stuff. Well, one client wrote back and said, I know that can be really difficult, and ended it with one word, and it said hugs. And all of a sudden my eyes just welled up. Just one word. A couple of days later, I thought, I wonder what AI would do with that. So I pulled up an app and I typed in basically what I typed into my clients. AI came back with, I know that can be really trying to lose a loved one. And then it proceeded to give me a whole list of resources and things to do, exercises I could do, all these things. And that was great. And it was well-intentioned, but it lacked that one word. And so, maybe AI can do some of that stuff, but I still think there's something to be said for human touch that just can't be replicated.
So
Yeah. And,
it's
yeah,
related
go
to
ahead.
that, if that's okay.
Yes,
And
please.
on what Michelle said, right? On fake versus real, right? Like, can language in and of itself make a difference is, a question I have, right? Because you may not be able to, right? People in the corporate environment, especially, there's always going to be people, well, for a while, as long as we're alive, that are not comfortable accessing certain aspects of themselves in the workplace. They're not willing to be vulnerable. They can't, for whatever set of reasons. So can't make people do that, but you can change the language. Do you think that helps in a corporate environment? Like changing service to care, for one simple idea.
Well, I do think that it could make a difference because, and Ross, since we worked together, you may remember there was a period where there was talk of changing sales to being consultant, because in the line of work we were doing at the time, that's really what the salespeople were doing. They were really being more consultants than they were selling anything. And sales kind of has this tinge that we don't like, whereas consultant sounds, no, this is a person who's going to work with me. So yeah, could care change it? Possibly. And honestly, in businesses, I think there shouldn't be a service department. If anything, it should be a support department or a problem-solving department, because that's what they do. They just solve your problems. They're not necessarily, but service is something everybody should do in business. Every single person in business, that's what they do. You are providing service to somebody, and that's what the business does. So why do we I think we're hurting ourselves by creating customer service as opposed to, why don't we just call it, problem solving or support or whatever, or user support, because that's really what that department does. But the whole business should be service. So could language change things? I think it can, to a degree. Yes. So Asha, I know you're trying to dive in here.
Yeah, no, my brain's just going off of everything everyone's saying. But I was kind of thinking about that whole question of like cognitive empathy, right? Like being able to articulate what appears to be empathy versus actual empathy, and having that literally physiological emotional reaction to what people are saying. And it's possible AI could get there, but there are things about tone, about inflection of voice, about pacing. There are things that you get from a human talking to another human that, at least at this stage, has not come out with chatbots. And I wonder, it's a matter of time, we'll find out whether they can replicate that, because those things, I talk a lot about how managers need to speak directly to their employees, because you can chat all you want and write the most perfect, I'm a lawyer, you can write the most perfect email, but there is something about just actually talking to the person and letting them hear your voice and hear you say like, hey, I didn't mean it that way, versus like, I hope you understand that was not the way I meant to come across in my last that you can write it all you want, but it doesn't feel the same way. And that, I think I don't know if we're going to get that
Asha,
sort of.
It's almost like you're describing the difference between listening to a record and going to a concert.
Yeah, right.
Because there is a difference, and we all know it. Because if the recording could do it all, nobody would go to a concert. But a few weeks ago, I went to see Bruce Springsteen, and it was fantastic. And I've got like every Bruce Springsteen album, but it's not the same. It's just not.
You can't measure the impact of the connection, right? And that goes back to what you were saying, where it's a hard thing for businesses, because how can you measure that you could measure the quality of the sound difference, but you can't put a metric on you were with all these people having this experience.
And the energy.
That's, I think, one of the challenges. Yeah.
And there is some science behind the fact that we do react to other people live that we don't, even in this environment. Like, I can't see your eyes close enough to see whether they're dilating or not. But when we talk to people, subconsciously, we do that. We do that stuff. We see the twitches and the movements and the eye movement and all that stuff. And we don't even know we're doing it. And it causes us to react differently and to read people differently. And I can't see that. I can see some of it here, but not all of it. And so there is a big difference. And I can tell you from speaking a lot and standing on a stage, there's something very different from doing it here and standing on a stage with a group of people and doing it that you just can't get. And so that's why I think, and I question whether AI will ever get to that point. I don't know that it can get to that level of subtlety.
I don't know that it needs to, and I think we've got to be careful about comparing open source generative AI with very specifically designed models. But I think I am familiar with a business that has an AI listen to its call center staff and give them feedback. And the clients of that software say the feedback is received more constructively than if a person says it. Because, well, bizarrely, that's because there isn't a relationship. There's no perception of a preconceived bias there.
Gotcha.
But then coming back to the NHS example, it's not about an AI, somebody walking into a consulting room and sitting down at a desk and an AI speaking to them. It's about the doctor being able to have a conversation, a coaching conversation. So the doctor says, I've got to deliver some bad news to this patient. You can see their medical history. What should I remember to say? What should I do? Maybe even, can you help me get in the right place for it? So I don't think it's necessarily a frontline activity, but I think there's a lot to be said for almost getting the group intelligence. I don't mean group, that collective intelligence that goes into designing the AI models. I'm going to try not to say any more about AI.
What's interesting about those use cases, Michelle, is that I think you're underscoring what Neal said, because those use cases are designed to make those doctors better humans, as opposed to replacing workers and being put in supervisory positions over people who are needing correction and a level of control that they can't get in traditional ways. But I can well imagine the use cases you're describing being helpful to a doctor because they want to be a better human for their patient, and that's exactly the guiding star that I think Neal is writing about here. And so last comment from me is there's a lot of interesting overlaps between what we talk about in Purposefully Human and Neal's work, because one of the things we talk about in Purposefully Human, interestingly enough, is how do you talk about the Purposefully Human movement, and what is the purposefully human way to do that? And one of the things that we concluded was you do it person to person, and in your book, Neal, you talk about people being inspirations for their colleagues, and inviting them to provide better care and better service. If we could invest in that ethos and that culture, then the people that do the work, who want to invest in being better humans, they're being invited by their colleagues rather than it coming from the top in the C-suite. And I think, going back to what I said a while ago, everybody intuitively, if you're a well-adjusted adult, knows how to take care of something. Take care of your kids, your pets, your parents, your loved ones, even strangers on the street. But for some reason, we haven't figured out what the love language in business is. And for all the reasons people have said, we've turned it into this sporting event where to win, you have to run over the back of the person next to you.
Okay.
And leave your emotions at the door.
Yeah, well, that's what people say.
I've always found that funny. When you go to you start a new job, you go to the company and you're meeting with people and they have their orientation and all that stuff. And it's all yay, 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 rah, rah, rah. And then you go behind closed doors and you talk to your manager and they go, yeah, they tell you all that stuff. But in this department, leave your emotions at the door. We don't want to hear that here.
Yeah.
And as if you can, as if you can do that, because we can't.
Right.
We're, as humans, we just don't do it. We're emotional creatures. We make decisions based on emotion, first and foremost. So our humanity we're bound to it. And Michelle, to your point about thinking about doctors, the book that I talked about earlier, Teresiak and Mazzarelli's book, Compassionomics, they wrote another book called Wonder Drug. And in both of them, they basically suggest that doctors pretty much suck at empathy because a lot of it gets worked out of them in medical school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're told over and over and over, don't get attached to your patients, don't get attached to your patients, right? But how do we not as human beings? It's almost something you have to train yourself to do. And so in their books, they basically say we need to kind of change that narrative. You got doctors to actually get back to being more human because it actually helps patients when they do. You have to read the book. It's a really good book, and it'll really kind of give you some insight into that doctor thing that's going on. But he proposes that he even says it only takes 40 seconds. A 40-second message can literally change the trajectory of somebody's healthcare. It's pretty fascinating. So
thank you very much, Neal. I think we could probably keep this going for a lot longer. There's so many different facets to this conversation, but sadly we are up in time. Can I ask, is there any final reflections you'd like to offer? Anything we should take away, Neal?
I get asked that a lot. I've been on several podcasts and things, and I guess my final words are the last 4 words in the book, and they are go do some good. And I even have stickers. If you want a sticker, let me know. I'll send you a sticker. But I think that's really what we need more of. Just go out there and go do some good. We need more good in the world, and we need more people doing it for people you don't even know.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I mean, there's so many things.
Else. So
so many things you touched on about the power of relationships, the language. The language for me is such a powerful one in terms of I hate onboarding and offboarding. I'd rather be welcomed and thanked for service. And I think these things are crept in and they've really dehumanized. But the other bit that struck me is there's a sense which I think taps into your inconvenience of we're losing ambition whilst we're really clever at some things. So when I think about caring, it's becoming obviously a much bigger issue as we get older populations. We are creating a language around humans as being deficit. And I think that's quite deliberate in terms of there's a lot of people talking about that you're only human, there's limitations. It creates a market that a robot carer then becomes much more obvious because it's reliable, it's efficient. And for the reasons we touched on today, but it's not functionally a person, but it's also then perpetuating the social isolation, which we know is another societal trend. And I just think we need perhaps to spend more time in that moment of, are we clear what problem we're solving? And how does that look? Because to your point, we are actually willing to be inconvenienced. We get pleasure from it, we get a reward from it. But I think we're almost being bypassed on that. And there's some, let's say, so many powerful trends and insights. And I'll go back to Jerry's point. You've taken a really actually quite complex area and brought it down to the delightful title of giving a shit. And I think actually that's something we can take away. Genuinely, it's a very actionable statement. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jerry, Asha, Michelle, and Ross. It's been fantastic to have a conversation with you and to hear your perspectives. And so we really value that, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. Katy, thank you so much for your hosting. It's been amazing. And Neal, we'll make sure that anyone watching this can find out where to get more information about your work and the book. But thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks for everybody showing up. It's great. Great to see everybody.